Hey friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using several different Lawn Fawn sets. I'm using Meow You Doing, Say What Pets, and Totally Awesome, and I'll actually be throwing in a fourth set later on. But for now, I have stamped out my images on some Copic friendly cardstock since I'll be coloring with my Copics today. And I'm starting with the log, and for that I'm using E55, E57, and E59. I took the E59 and threw in some dark streaks there. I'm not exactly doing light sources like a usual object. Since this is wood and I want it to have some wood grain texture, I just kind of threw in some shadows where the lines are drawn by the artist. And then I am blending with that E57 and then filling everything else in with the E55. And I just made sure to be a little extra heavy-handed with the darker colors toward the bottom of the log. Next, I'm going to be coloring in my lily pads, and for those I'm using G14, G16, and G19. I'm actually starting with the shadow toward the front of the object with that G19 and then blending toward the back. I thought that I would put my highlight on the back of the image just to make it look like maybe it's a little bit later in the day, not quite sunset, but just a little bit in the late afternoon, so the sun is a little bit lower and it would be hitting the backs of the objects. So I am adding in a little G28 because it wasn't quite dark enough for me, and then I'm going to blend that back out with the remaining colors. I'm just going to show one of the lily pads on screen, but I colored them all exactly the same. For the grasses, I decided to keep the G28 so I would have some continuity with those green shades, but I'm mixing it up by using the G21 and G24 with that, just to create a little bit of difference between the objects that are in the water and the objects that are not. So again, just the G28 is my darkest, and then I'm blending with the G24 as my midtone, and then a little G21 for the highlight. Next, I'll be using Y0000, Y11, and Y13, and I'll color in my little water lilies. I'm using the Y11 and Y000 for the petals, just to add a little bit of color there. I don't want too much. I want them to look nice and soft and almost white. And then I'll use a little bit of the Y13 just on the inside of the petals on the back side to sort of look like this is the center of the lily. I'm going to stick with the yellows but go quite a bit darker with the Y15 and Y17 for my dragonfly. I'm again limiting my color palette on today's card. I seem to enjoy the challenge of just using a few shades and then sticking in that color palette. So today I just have basically green, brown, yellow, and gray, and then later I'll have a little bit of blue as well. So all that's left is my cats. I'm first going to work on the little guy from Say What Pets. But I am going to include the coloring of both of these in the video, even though I'm using the same exact markers. I just thought it would be fun to show you two different versions of coloring these kitties. So they'll be the same colors, but different patterns on them. I'm using C3, C5, and C7 for both. And I'm just starting with some shadows and kind of working my way toward the center. I'm not 100% sure where I'm going. I know that I want to leave some white patches, so I'm just building gradually toward the center and just kind of working my way down and getting lighter and lighter as I get towards the areas that I want to leave white. So on this little guy, I left him a white patch around his nose and mouth. I also gave him some white socks on his front feet and a white tip on his tail, and then a little V on his chest. Then on the larger cat, which is from Meow You Doing, I'm starting the same with those darker colors in the shadowed areas, but I definitely want to switch things up, so I want to leave much more white area on this guy. So I'm going into it knowing that and just being really sparing with that C7. and then pulling that color down. I know that I want to do kind of like a little white triangle in the center of his face, so I'm just bringing those darker colors down to create that. I know that I wanted to have his dark back coming around his sides and just kind of softening towards a white chest. And then again, I'm leaving him a little white tip of his tail. Just making sure to soften the edges of the C5 with the C3. And then I'm also going to add in the C0 to just help bridge that transition into the white areas. So I'm just coloring lightly over the edge of the C3 and then letting that fade off into the white. I'll bring in the R81 to color in both of the kitties' noses and give them some rosy cheeks. So I have just a little tiny pop of pink on the card. And then I'm going to take all of the matching dies and trim out all of the images. So now I've got the little fish from Mermaid for You, and I'm going to stamp that out with using VersaFine Onyx Black ink on some Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock. And I did take a little pencil and draw kind of the area that I wanted to make sure to stamp them in. So I'm going to just stamp out a whole bunch of these. My idea was to create a little koi pond with the two cats sitting on a log watching the fish. So I'm just stamping wherever I think that they should go in different directions until I have my scene kind of laid out. Then I'm going to take some of my Zig Clean Color Real Brush pens and I'm going to blend those onto the background. So I'm just scribbling them off on an acrylic block and picking them up that way so I can get a nice soft wash. The first color that I'm using is 042 Turquoise Green, and I put quite a lot of that into the sky, and then I'm bringing that down into the pond as well, just in a softer version by using a little more water, and then I'm adding some little splatters and spots there as well. Then I'm pulling in 047 May Green, and I'm going to create a transition in the middle where there is some grass and a ground area to put my log with my cats. I'm going to make it really kind of subtle and fade it into the sky and the water, but there will be a little bit of a difference there. And then I'm using 031 Cobalt Blue to really emphasize that watery area. I'm pulling that down especially all around the koi and then just blending that out with some extra water until I have a look that I like. So I heat set that and then went over each of the colors again just to add some more layers and some different depths and values of that background. And then I'm going to go ahead and color in all of my little koi. This time I'm taking the marker directly to the paper, and the first color I'm using is 052 Bright Yellow. I'm just going to color in a few different ones here and there, and then I'll also add some different layers of color. I use 070 Orange, and then 023 Scarlet Red. So those were my three kind of yellow-orange colors. And then I decided to throw in a black. I used 090 Gray. I didn't want to go quite as dark as a black. And I just threw in some different spots and things like koi have. And then I took a very small tipped paintbrush. This is a number 2 round of the Silver Brush Company, the Black Velvet brushes. And I just very carefully kind of softened out that color with a little tiny bit of water. I trimmed down that panel with the Stitch Rectangle Stackables, so it has that nice stitch detail all along the edge. And now I can begin to set my scene. I'm going to start with the log since that's kind of the grounding image for the top half of the card. And I did pop that up with some foam tape. I'm also going to be popping up my kitties with some foam tape on the area that is above the log, and then I'm using a little liquid glue with the Lawn Fawn glue tube for the area that is overlapping the log. So I'm just going to nestle them together side by side. And then I'm going to figure out the placement of all my lily pads. So I knew that I wanted the larger one towards the top on the right. And then I'm going to add the smaller ones all around, and I am popping them up with foam tape as well, just to create that depth so it really looks like those fish are swimming down below the surface. So I'm just figuring out the placement of my last couple of lily pads there, and I'm not pushing them down too hard because I know that I still have to get my sentiment on there somewhere, and I don't want it to overlap too much of my scene, so they're kind of just resting there until I figure that part out later. So now I'm going to add my little water lilies. I've got the largest one near the largest lily pad, and then I've got 2 additional ones that I just need to figure out where I want them to be. So I tried a couple different places until I decided on what looked good. And I decided that I needed a couple more filler images for the top half of the card. So I did off camera stamp and color the cattails that came with the Totally Awesome stamp set. I did the large and small. I did, I believe, 3 of each, or yeah, I believe it was 3 of each. And then I'm just going to add those with some liquid glue kind of behind my log and really just fill in that scene up there. It helps your eye be drawn upward, since before it was like the whole scene was bottom heavy. Everything was down below, and this just creates a little bit more balance. It also just helps smooth that transition from the pond into the land and sky as well. And the Copics that I used on those were the same as the wood for the top half of the cattail, and the same for these little grasses on the bottom half. So now I just have to attach these 2 little grasses in front of the log with some more of that glue tube, and then I'm going to add the dragonfly up in the top right corner with some foam tape. For my sentiment, I'm using black licorice ink to stamp out "Wishing You a Possum Day" on some white cardstock, and that is from the Meow You Doing stamp set. Then I'm also going to pop in my card base, which is Lawn Fawn's Mermaid cardstock, and I'll be stamping the inside with peacock ink, and I'm using a little sleeping kitty and a speech bubble and a fishbone, so it seems like one of the kitties couldn't resist the koi pond after all for a little snack. And then inside the speech bubble, I'm stamping "You're the Cat's Meow." The pattern paper that I'm using on today's card is from the Lawn Fawn Spring Fling collection, and I trimmed that down with another of the Lawn Fawn large stitch rectangle stackables, so it has that nice stitch detail, but it's going to cover the entire front of my card. So I used that for both the floral print and also this little blue print with the tiny X's, so it would also match up along the sides. So I'm just going to layer that right over top and make sure it's nice and centered, and then smooth that into place. I've added some foam tape to the back of my card base just so that I can pop that up and have a little bit more lift and some dimension. So I'm going to peel off the release papers and line that up nice and straight in the center, just so it's even on all 4 sides. And then I've also got my sentiment banner cut down with an Everyday Sentiment Banners die. And I just shifted that in the die to make it a little bit shorter so that it would match the length of the sentiment a little bit better. So I've added a strip of foam tape to the back of that, and then I'm just going to fiddle a little bit with those lily pads so that they're not covering up, or they're not being covered too much by that sentiment strip, and then I'll pop that down into place. As a final touch, I decided to add a bit of crystal stickles to my card to add a little glitz and glimmer. So I'm going to add it to the dragonfly's wings, and then a little bit to each of my water lilies, and then to my koi as well. I decided, at first I was going to do just a few of them, but I decided to do all of them since fish scales do reflect underwater. Just being really careful to just go over the fish and not over the black lines too much, otherwise it kind of covers those up. And then I'm also going to add just a tiny little dot to each of the kitties' noses. So that is going to complete my card for today. I'll lift that up so you can see all that sparkle and shine and give you another peek at the inside. I think that was kind of cheeky, but it just makes me laugh. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. You can actually find this on the Lawn Fawn blog, and I'll have a link in the description bar below and also from my blog as well. If you did enjoy today's video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up, and you can subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I would really love to have your support. If you'd like to keep on watching, here are 2 extra videos that I thought you might also be interested in, so you can click on either one of those. I hope you all have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.